Welcome to the Arkansas Wildlife Podcast, the official podcast of the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. We are talking hunting, fishing, and conservation, with engaging guests and in-depth discussions with game and fish staff. It's Arkansas Wildlife, the podcast for all things outdoors in the natural state.
Welcome to the Arkansas Wildlife Podcast. Thanks for dropping in for another episode. We're on fire today on this episode. I mean, literally, we're going to set stuff on fire. No, we're not going to set anything on fire here in the podcast studio, but we're welcoming Emily Roberts. She is Prescribed Fire Coordinator for Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. Emily, thanks for jumping on with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you do set a lot of things on fire. Before we get into some, details about the benefits of fire and how we implement that here at Arkansas Game and Fish, let's spend a little time getting to know you a little bit. First time on the podcast, although you said you listened to the podcast before, actually to prep for your interview. That's pretty cool. How did that come about?
That's right. I was just doing some research before my interview for this position and saw that you did a podcast with Randy Brentz, my predecessor, about 2 years ago. So I was listening to that just to learn a few things.
Cool. Well, where are you from, Emily? How'd you arrive at Arkansas Game and Fish? Give us a little bit about your background.
So I'm from Central Arkansas, and I went to college at UCA, and I studied...
Homegrown, right here.
That's right. I studied environmental science, and there was a nature reserve on campus that I got to work in. So I had a great professor there, Casey Larson, and she took a group of us students under her wing and taught us how to do fire on that little nature reserve. There was like a 5-acre chunk of remnant tallgrass prairie.
I think I know exactly where that is. Yeah. It's like right off of Donaghy, right?
Yeah, Jewelmore Nature Reserve. Yeah. Taught us how to do fire, taught us how to do invasive treatments. And so at that point, I was like, wow, this is great. I want to do this for a career. And so I did some seasonal jobs after that, got to go out west, and then finally ended up back here with a different state agency, the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission, for about 5 years. And then I ended up here.
Right. Nice. Well, that's a pretty good route to get here to Arkansas Game and Fish. So I got to ask you, like, anytime we talk to the biologists like yourselves that love to get out there and manage habitat. Boy, there's like a pyro streak in all of you. I mean, what is it about this? I mean, just because fire, like our caveman, cavewoman, like ancestors, like this that want to make that fire. I mean,
yeah, it's great. It's warm. It's interesting to look at. I've always loved a campfire. There's just something about it.
Well, you do a lot of burning in the course of your job. I mean, just kind of give us a background of prescribed fire in Arkansas, because you mentioned, we've talked about it here on the podcast before, but it's still, I think, not as much as it used to be, but it's still a little bit misunderstood, and I like why fire is good. I think we can't tell that story enough. How would you kind of explain that?
Yeah, I think it all boils down to prescribed fire, or not prescribed fire, but fire on the landscape as a natural disturbance process has always been here in Arkansas until humans kind of took it off the landscape. And so what we're doing now as land managers, we're just reinstating a natural process that used to be in place.
Yeah, kind of get it back to what it did. I mean, it's lightning strikes, things like that, native peoples intentionally burning things. I mean, all of the above, right?
That's right. We have historic narratives that tell us that fire was on the landscape, and frequently, and also at large scales. There were early explorers that came through, Thomas Nuttall, Henry Schoolcraft. They came through the state and they were documenting these open landscapes that were very grassy, trees were scattered. We see that here in the state now, but it's much less than it was back then. It used to be more common, having that prairie, savanna, woodland matrix.
And outside of the obvious benefits of conserving our habitats, trying to return them to, we'll never get them back to exactly the way they were, right? But we're trying to get them closer to that. But there's a lot of wildlife benefits as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. If you think about what you see if you're driving along the interstate now, closed canopy woodlands, tons of stems per acre, and not much growing on the ground, right? It's a lot of leaf litter. There's no wildflowers. There's very few grasses growing under there. So that's not much cover or food for wildlife.
Right, yeah.
And so in these systems that should be more of that prairie, savanna, woodland, that's part of it, is burning off that leaf litter, opening up the canopy a little bit with fire and other timber management processes to get that food and cover back for wildlife and make it, more usable for for wildlife.
And kind of, if you would, give us a little bit of that history about fire suppression, like what happened.
Yeah. So, late 1800s, early 1900s, human population was increasing in the state. Settlements were growing. And so naturally people didn't want fire encroaching upon what they've just built. And so they would see these naturally occurring fires sweeping across the landscape and they'd think, man, we have to stop this. It's gonna affect what we're doing here. And so fire suppression became the norm during that time frame, and to protect timber, to protect settlements. And it wasn't until fairly recently, late 1900s, maybe even early 2000s, that we're starting to regain some of that knowledge that we had about prescribed fire and the benefits and managing landscapes with it.
What was it? Was there like a tipping point or a watershed moment, like in that 1990s, early 2000s? Because I've been here since at Game and Fish since 06, and we were getting pretty serious about fire then, but it was a relatively really new thing then. What happened, and not just necessarily in Arkansas, but across maybe the Southeast, where we begin to see more of that implementation of intentional fire on the landscape. What was it? Did our knowledge just catch up with or did society change? Did opinions and attitudes change, or did we help convince people? What was that what happened to get us back closer to what we're doing now?
Yeah, I think a little bit of everything that you just said. Opinions changing in relation to fire, not seeing fire as just bad all the time, that it can be used as a tool. Lots of outreach by the large land management agencies. There's been acknowledgments by those agencies to say that we were doing suppression in the past, but that's not the way forward. We're going to have to change. So acknowledgments that we need to move how we're going.
I guess a lot of it, you just go out there and you see the results of of suppressing fire and realize we can't go on like this.
Yeah, looking at our habitats and realizing this is not working for us.
Right. Well, okay, so moving into I guess we're in 2026 now, third or fourth decade of the third decade of the 21st century. We're cooking. We are really setting a lot of stuff on fire now. How would you characterize our current sort of state of affairs in Arkansas as far as fire as a land management tool?
Yeah, I can't speak to total acres burned in the whole state, but we've got all kinds of partners working together, burning individually, burning together on cooperative areas. We partner all the time with Forest Service, Park Service, Natural Heritage Commission, Central Arkansas Water, Quail Forever. We're all working together to get acres burned on the landscape.
Yeah, and it's that's not just our areas, our wildlife management areas, but you're talking about Forest Service lands, cooperatively managed stuff all over. But it adds up to a pretty good. It's a pretty good amount. What is the? I guess I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. We've made a lot of inroads, but there's still progress to make. But how would you characterize public perceptions of prescribed fire now? After we've been doing it for 25, 30 years as an agency and with these cooperating partners.
Yeah, I think folks are learning more about fire, especially through outreach. We've got our new qualified prescribed burner law in place, and private landowners are taking those courses and learning how to conduct fire on their own property. Lots of people are seeing smoke from these agencies that are conducting burns and asking questions and trying to figure out what's going on. So yeah, education is a big piece of it. And I think in general, folks are supportive of prescribed fire.
Yeah, I think when they see the results, you walk across an area like Harold E. Alexander, WMA, which has been a lot of cedar removal, a lot of those other things that go along before you do the fire. That's a great example. But you can't argue with the benefits, like you said, so thick that you can't even find a blade of grass underneath the cedar trees, to all these rare plants that have been buried down in the soil that you thought were just gone, but they're there.
Yeah, and we've seen great success stories like at Stone Prairie WMA with the first successful quail hunt recently. And, You know,
Absolutely.
that's due to the management that's gone out there, which is a combination of timber management and prescribed fire and restoring those grasslands that used to be there. Because that's a property that when we acquired it in 2017, it was just extremely thick timber. You know,
Yeah.
it had some high quality remnant stuff, but it had just grown too thick. And so
Right.
in restoring, we've seen great success there.
Well, speaking of Stone Prairie, we shot some video out there last year, and it was in the summertime, which is something that's a little bit different. We're recording this in mid-March, and that's kind of, despite March being a windy month, that's kind of like February, March, April into early April's been our sort of window. That's changing. How is that so?
Yeah, so historically, you know, we burn about 70% of our acres in this February, March timeframe. And while we're going to continue, you know, conducting fire during this time, we're trying to shift habitats that we can to burn in the late growing season. And there's a lot of reasons why. There's specific objectives we're trying to meet that are better met in the late growing season. So, and when I say late growing season, you know, we have a really long growing season here in Arkansas. Things start greening up in mid-February and then don't go dormant until, you know, mid-November. But late growing season, I'm talking about the historic lightning fire season, which is typically July to September.
Okay.
And so
What are some of those things that you can accomplish in those, you know, later growing season fires as opposed to, you know, that February, March window?
So, you know, growing season, plants are growing, so we have the opportunity to select for or against plants that we want or don't want.
Right.
And so we have the opportunity to change the plant community structure, which in a lot of cases when we have these restoration units, that's what we want. If we're going from closed canopy forest to savanna, you know, with a lower basal area, trying to promote the wildflowers and grasses, then that's a time frame that we're going to want. Late growing season fire promotes forb diversity. It also gives us the opportunity to target woody encroachment, which we have a lot of on our prairie and savanna units, you know, sweetgums, elms. Burning during the late summer gives us the opportunity to have more of an effect on those stems.
Gotcha.
They've spent the whole growing season devoting resources to their
Right.
above ground structure.
We're setting them up for failure, basically.
Yeah, so we're giving them as much time to put energy into above ground structures, and then we're going to hit them with fire in the late growing season so that by the time winter comes around, they don't have as many resources to pull back down into their rootstock. So if we do that repeatedly, we're going to have the effect we want on reducing those populations.
Gotcha.
So that's one example.
Yeah, well, that's a great one. I mean, you know, I think anybody that's spent much time outdoors knows how sweetgums can take over an opening in the forest for
Quickly,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Let's shift gears a little bit. You were, you know, obviously as prescribed fire program coordinator, you're overseeing all of it. We've recently, you mentioned Randy Brents. He was in your position previously, now moved over as an assistant chief in our private lands habitat division. And that division does a lot of different things with landowners, but helping them get lined out to do these burns, to implement prescribed fire on their private property is a big chunk of what they do. You mentioned the certified prescribed, is that right?
Qualified prescribed burner.
Prescribed burner designation. What does that mean, and like what are we doing to help folks get there?
Sure. So qualified prescribed burner, that came from Act 695 that was enacted a couple years ago. And so this act provides people with civil liability protection if they're burning and, you know, if something were to go wrong.
Right.
And so in order to get that protection, you have to become a qualified prescribed burner by taking a course. It's a 2-day course that we offer in conjunction with the Arkansas Forestry Division. And so take the course, get the certificate, and then when it comes time to burn, a qualified prescribed burner has to have a written burn plan on hand, which includes things like where the burn is, what the person's name is, what are the objectives. And then, you know, if they do those things and meet the requirements, then they will get civil liability protection if something happens, unless there's negligence involved.
Right.
And so I will say no cases have gone through court. This act is so new. We're kind of waiting to see how these things are going to be interpreted. But that's the gist of it.
Yeah, no, well, it seems like that's a really positive development in that it does two things. It provides some kind of requisite training. I mean, we don't want people just going out there and dropping matches, right?
Yeah.
And it encourages people by giving them those protections to participate in this activity, whereas they might have had some, qualms about doing so previously. So
yeah,
sounds pretty cool to me.
Yeah, and beyond that, we have our network of prescribed burn associations.
You read my mind. That was going to be my next question related to that.
So, that's something that's touched on at the qualified prescribed burner courses, but we have a network of PBAs. We have 14 of them across the state, and that covers 50 of our 75 counties. And so we do still have some counties that aren't covered. So if anyone is looking at that map of PBAs and their county is not covered, consider becoming a leader and setting one up.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So all that information can be accessed by just searching Arkansas Game and Fish and prescribed fire. Okay. And that would bring anyone to a page that has the information on the qualified prescribed burner courses coming up, information on the PBAs. It'll take them to a link of the Arkansas Prescribed Burn Association where they can see all that. And also a link to the map of all of our private lands biologists for setting up site visits.
Awesome. Great information, Emily. Let's get down in the weeds a little bit, or the ashes, as it were, here, and talk about some of the kind of more fine scale stuff, because I would like to leave our listeners with, and I was jokingly said, we don't want people just going out there dropping matches. There is a method to the madness. Having tried to shoot video of some of these in the past and coordinating with folks, just the Goldilocks zone, that narrow little window that you have to jump through when you are going to do these fires. It's pretty fascinating to me. Like, I don't even know where to begin, what to ask you, but just kind of maybe start by telling us how difficult it is just to get a fire going sometimes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's all the work that goes into it before you even get into the field to conduct the fire. I mentioned prescribed burn plans, that we have to make sure those are written, that they're in place, they're updated. Those are going to state what the objectives for the unit are. And we never do a burn without having objectives. That's so important that we know why we're burning, right, so we know what kind of fire to apply. And it'll go over how many resources we need, what kind of ignition techniques we're going to use, what the fire lines look like, how they need to be prepped, which then takes us into prepping the fire lines. So we'll have to go out there, scout the unit, see what needs to be done. Dead trees along the perimeter might need to be removed. Fire breaks need to be installed or maintained. And then, all that before we even get to the field. And then,
right.
And then comes, observing the weather, waiting for that prescription that you've written that's in the burn plan, waiting on a very specific wind direction sometimes if you're burning next to a road, waiting for the right humidity levels, temperature, all of that.
Right. So what you talked about, what type of fire, and I'm making an assumption here that some of those things you just talked about, humidity, temperature, wind, are all going to change the characteristics of that fire. Is that what you're saying? I mean,
yeah, weather and also ignition techniques.
Okay.
So, if we have a unit, we talked about prairie savanna woodland matrix. Those are very fire dependent habitats. But we also have true forests, right?
Sure.
That tulip poplar, northern red oak, pawpaw trees. So sometimes we have burn units that are so big, they include all these different fuel types and habitats. And so we don't necessarily want to force fire in the little forest, north-facing slope ravine, but we want to have a good coverage burn on the south-facing slopes and the west-facing slopes where we might have more glades or savannas. And so we would carefully think about what kind of ignition techniques we want to use there, which in this case might be just lighting the ridge tops with the ignition drone or someone on a ATV torch, and then letting the fire kind of naturally fizzle out when it reaches those forest, wetter areas.
Right.
Instead of gridding out the whole unit and just, kind of forcing fire into these places.
Into an area that it might not naturally go if it was a lightning strike or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. it's got to be frustrating sometimes. I know as a someone documenting prescribed fire, it was frustrating. Like, oh man, this is the day. It's now we can't go because of this factor or that. What's that like when you wake up in the morning? You're really ready to go out there and do some great work on habitat, and you're like,
it happens all the time. We just try to have a backup plan.
Yeah.
Man, if we don't get this north wind we need, what's the unit we could do with a south wind? We're
Right,
always
right.
trying to think of a
So
plan B.
Like have something else. Like, well, we can't burn here, but we could shift gears and go over to this unit or
That's
this
right.
area and do something different.
Yeah,
there.
that's right.
I've heard it cited, and I know it varies from year to year, but like, what is kind of a rough or a range of percentages of days when you're planning or, fire, and then you actually get to burn something? And I know it's probably ballpark if you can. I mean,
yeah, we really focus our planning efforts during seasons where we know we're going to get pretty good burn windows.
Yeah.
But, we had a couple of times where we were trying to burn at Madison County earlier this year in the winter, and it was just so gusty. I mean, it's been such a dry, gusty winter, and the gust would be about, 2 or 3 over what we really felt safe doing, and so we had to call it off. So that did happen a few times, but overall, I'd say, maybe 10 to 20% of the time we wake up and think, we probably the weather's not
going to
perfect.
happen today. Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, I guess like we've learned enough over the last 30 years of really getting serious about this that we're sort of refining and fine tuning our abilities.
Yeah, and the weather sources we have are great.
Well, and that's a great point. I mean, 30 years ago, although there were still satellites in space and, all that, but I mean, our weather forecasting has become a lot more refined, with technology. That's helpful. What are some places that you would point to, Emily, like some wildlife management areas or national forest units or maybe just a handful of places that you would, like if somebody that is not as familiar with what we do is listening to this, like I want to see the results. Give me a handful of spots that you'd recommend folks to go out and look, or they're going to turkey hunt this spring or follow a blue line to find a smallmouth bass or whatever.
Yeah.
Give me some spots.
It's hard to name just a few. I mean,
name as many as you want.
You mentioned Heraldry earlier. Yeah. That's an area that so much management work has gone into, and I think it looks a lot different than it did just a decade ago.
Right.
And Gulf Mountain in the same vein.
Okay.
Lots of restoration work to promote savanna and woodland habitat.
We raised a covey of quail there with Clint Johnson back in December, I guess it was. So positive results I can speak to, anecdotally at least.
Yeah, and we touched on Stone Prairie. That's part of that grassland complex in central Arkansas.
Yeah.
Really remnant, high-quality stuff, awesome wildflowers, and great habitat.
Yeah, awesome spot. And as you already noted, one of the 2 spots where last year we opened up a permit quail hunt on public land for the first time. So
yeah, that's right.
Another data point that speaks to the success of prescribed fire program.
Yeah, and I've got to mention Grandview Prairie too.
Well, yeah, that's that's a pretty awesome spot.
Yeah, Blackland Prairie, awesome wildflowers again. Just tons of firework that's gone out there. Timber management.
Yeah, I know we've got the Woodlands auto tour out at Camp Robinson, which is another, if you want to take a drive and kind of read some of the interpretive panels there that explain different ecosystems and how fire has benefited that. It's a fascinating topic for sure. Emily, what else do we need to cover that we haven't? A lot of fun stuff to talk about with fire for sure.
Yeah. I don't know. I really want to encourage listeners to get involved. And I did want to say, you don't have to be a landowner to become a member of a prescribed burn association. You can live in the city, and, if you are interested in prescribed fire and maybe you want to own land someday, I think it'd still be a great opportunity to work with other landowners and help them burn on their property and just see how it all works. Yeah.
One thing we haven't touched on, and we usually try to make fire is a very cost-effective management tool too. I mean, speak to that if you would.
Yeah, the figures are, all over the place depending on, who's giving them, but anywhere from $20 to $50 is the going rate for prescribed fire, which makes it the cheapest management tool I know of. Any timber management's going to be well above that value.
Sure. Well, Emily, thanks for spending a little bit of time with us and talking about prescribed fire in Arkansas. It's always an enlightening conversation. And again, you would encourage folks that are interested, go to agfc.com. There's all kinds of resources there. You can find out, as Emily noted, prescribed burn associations, one of our qualified prescribed burner workshops that we do with forestry. So check it out and make fire happen on your little piece of Arkansas, and it'll lead to great results. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Trey.
That's all we got for this episode of the Arkansas Wildlife Podcast. We'll talk to you next time. So long, everybody.